What if one of the most feared objects in the night sky was never meant to be understood as a planet at all? And what if the reason ancient people trembled at Saturn had less to do with superstition and more to do with a memory they could never fully explain? If this kind of hidden history deep dive pulls you in, tap like, subscribe, and share this with the one friend who always texts you. You need to see this. Look up at Saturn through a telescope and it seems almost peaceful. It hangs in the dark with its pale gold glow and its perfect rings, calm and distant, almost delicate. It does not look dangerous. It does not look cursed. It does not look like the kind of object that would leave a mark on human imagination for thousands of years. And yet, culture after culture gave Saturn a special kind of attention. Not casual attention, not simple admiration. Fear. The ancient world looked at many lights in the heavens. They tracked Venus. They celebrated Jupiter. They linked Mars to war, power, blood, and kings. But Saturn carried a different emotional weight. In Rome, the festival connected to Saturn did not just honor a god, it turned society upside down. Rules bent, roles reversed, order weakened. It was as if people believed that when Saturn's moment came around, normal structure had to step aside. Why would one object in the sky become linked with reversal, judgment, endings, and dread across different civilizations that did not all share the same books, the same languages, or the same rulers? One answer says it was myth, another says it was astrology. But a stranger answer appears in the world around the Book of Enoch, and that answer does not treat Saturn as a normal planet at all. It treats it as something with purpose, something functional, something placed. The Book of Enoch has fascinated readers for generations because it feels different from most ancient religious writing. It is filled with visions, fallen beings, cosmic journeys, punishments, secrets, and descriptions of heaven that sound less like poetry and more like someone trying to report what they saw with limited human language. Some communities treasured it, others pushed it aside. Some saw it as dangerous, some saw it as misunderstood. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Enoch was not ordinary. In the better-known parts of Enoch, we read about the Watchers, the rebellious beings who descend to Earth, break divine boundaries, teach forbidden knowledge, and unleash corruption. But behind those famous passages is a larger picture, one that turns the universe into a structured place filled with gates, chambers, divisions, storehouses, boundaries, and prisons. In Enoch, heaven is not vague, it is organized. The cosmos is not abstract, it is arranged, because if the universe in Enoch is structured, then punishment in Enoch is also structured. Evil is not simply judged and forgotten. It is contained, restrained, sealed away, locked into specific places for specific reasons. And when you read the text with that idea in mind, one disturbing possibility appears. What if Saturn, in that older imagination, was not just another moving light in the sky? What if it was understood as a cosmic containment point? Today, when we hear the word Saturn, we think of astronomy class. We think of gas giant, rings of ice and rock, moons, storms, distance, gravity. Beautiful photos from spacecraft. But ancient people did not see a label diagram in a textbook. They saw a mysterious object moving in the darkness with a slow, heavy rhythm. They saw a wandering star with a cycle long enough to shape generations. They watched it return, and they built meaning around that return. Saturn moves with patience. It does not rush across the sky like a sign meant for a moment. It lingers. It returns. It feels old. Ancient observers may not have known orbital mechanics, but they knew recurrence. They knew pattern. They knew the emotional power of a thing that seems to come back on its own timetable, untouched by human urgency. In many old traditions, the slowest visible heavenly body often became associated with age, limits, endings, burden, law, harvest, time, or death. That alone would have been enough to give Saturn an ominous reputation. But the antique imagination takes the idea further. It suggests not just symbolism, but function, not just meaning, but machinery. If Saturn was merely a symbol, then fear of Saturn is psychological. If Saturn was merely a god name attached to a wandering light, then the story is cultural. But if Saturn was imagined as an outer station of restraint, a cosmic boundary device, then the fear becomes memory inside a religious framework. It becomes the leftover echo of something humanity believed had been put there for a reason. And the reason was not comfort. Across the wider Enoch tradition, one repeated idea keeps surfacing. Some beings could be judged on Earth, others had to be removed from it. Some corrupt powers were chained in darkness below, but there are hints, especially in later mystical interpretations and fringe readings, that one class of rebellion was too vast, too old, or too dangerous to be handled in ordinary ways. Once that idea enters the imagination, Saturn changes. It is no longer just far away. It becomes a location with a task, a prison at the edge of the visible order. That claim sounds extreme, and it should, but that is exactly why it has survived in whispers instead of living comfortably in mainstream teaching. A world with moral poetry is manageable. A world with cosmic architecture is harder to control. The moment ancient religion starts sounding like it is mapping structures instead of symbols, people get nervous because structures raise questions. Who built them? What were they built to hold? Why place them where all humanity could see them, yet almost nobody could understand them? And why would so many old cultures, without using the same exact words, act as though Saturn stood for confinement, reversal, judgment, and danger? One reason this idea has power is that Saturn does not merely appear in sacred speculation. It appears in lived ritual memory. Roman Saturnalia was not a normal feast. It was a ritualized collapse of hierarchy. Servants and masters symbolically reversed positions. Public order loosened. This was not random party behavior. It carried emotional logic. It was as if the festival reenacted a temporary breach in order under the shadow of Saturn itself. The same pattern shows up in other places. Saturn was repeatedly linked to dark authority, endings, severity, and ancient power. Even when details changed from one culture to the next, the emotional profile remained strangely stable. That does not prove a hidden prison in the sky, but it does prove that Saturn was rarely treated as neutral. Now let's bring Enoch back into the picture. What makes Enoch so potent is not merely that it speaks of rebellious beings. Many ancient traditions do that. What makes Enoch potent is the way it frames the universe as governed, layered, and actively managed. Windows of heaven open, storehouses of winds exist, stars can keep appointed paths or violate them, angels oversee processes, judgment is spatial. The moral order and the physical order overlap. Once you accept that worldview, the idea of a cosmic prison is not out of place at all. In that framework, Saturn becomes imaginable as more than an object. It becomes a sign of containment. The rings, in speculative readings, stop being just rings. They become restraints in the symbolic mind, bands, bonds, encircling force. The visible form of Saturn almost invites that interpretation. Even now, Saturn looks less like a planet and more like a thing marked off from the rest. And this is where the emotional tension deepens. Because if something is contained, then something is inside. And if something is inside, then the real fear is never the prison. The real fear is what the prison was made to hold. A prison always tells two stories at once. It tells you that authority existed strong enough to build it, and it tells you that a threat existed serious enough to require it. So when fringe interpreters read Enoch and connect Saturn to confinement, they are not just making Saturn scarier, they are enlarging the entire spiritual map. And if something is inside, then the real fear is never the prison. The real fear is what the prison was made to hold. A prison always tells two stories at once. It tells you that authority existed strong enough to build it, and it tells you that a threat existed serious enough to require it. So when fringe interpreters read Enoch and connect Saturn to confinement, they are not just making Saturn scarier. They are enlarging the entire spiritual map. Suddenly creation contains old rebellion on a scale bigger than humanity. Suddenly evil is not only moral failure in the human heart, it is also cosmic insurgency. If you're still with me, hit subscribe before the next reveal, because the deeper we go, the stranger this gets, and send this video to someone who loves the sentence. Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. There is another reason Saturn invites this theory. It sits at a threshold in the ancient imagination. For most of human history, Saturn was the farthest visible planet known to the naked eye. Beyond it lay mystery. Beyond it lay the unseen. Beyond it lay whatever the ordinary eye could not map. That made Saturn a natural edge marker. It was the last major public sign before the unknown swallowed everything else. Ancient minds did not divide cosmology from theology the way modern people often do. The edge of sight was also the edge of order. The last visible light before darkness could become a gate, a seal, a wall, a throne, a station, or a warning. So even apart from any disputed textual claim, Saturn already had the right symbolic position to become a boundary object in sacred imagination. Then you add Enoch's obsession with boundaries, and the connection becomes almost inevitable. That is why so many people who study alternative readings of Enoch focus on cosmology instead of just the Watchers. The Watcher story is dramatic, yes, but the real shock is the system behind it. Enoch suggests a universe that responds to rebellion with architecture. Judgment leaves shape, punishment leaves placement, transgression leaves scars in the structure of creation itself. Of course, we have to be honest here. The Book of Enoch, in its surviving forms, is ancient, layered, translated, copied, and debated. Scholars do not all agree on every section, every dating issue, every manuscript relationship, or every theological implication. Anyone who speaks with total certainty about hidden cosmic details in Enoch is moving beyond what the text can prove. That matters. It is important. And if we ignore that, we stop thinking and start drifting. But uncertainty does not make the question disappear. Because even if the most dramatic claims cannot be proven word for word, the broader pattern remains. Enoch repeatedly presents a universe where divine order is concrete, rebellion is spatially managed, and dangerous beings are restrained in real locations. That pattern is not invented by modern speculation. It is baked into the text's imagination. So the real question becomes this. If ancient readers extended that logic outward, what did they think they were looking at when they looked at Saturn? A planet, a symbol, or a sign of active containment? There is a chilling elegance to the prison interpretation. Saturn is beautiful, but distant. Visible, but unreachable. Marked, but unreadable. Slow, but relentless. It dominates imagination without revealing itself. If you wanted a cosmic image for something sealed away from humanity but never entirely hidden, you could hardly design a better one. And yes, the rings intensify everything. Even in the modern age, Saturn's rings feel unnatural to the untrained eye. They give the planet a deliberate appearance, almost like an insignia. They make it look constructed, not literally engineered in a scientific sense, but symbolically designed. Most planets look like worlds. Saturn looks like an object. It looks appointed. That appearance matters in mythic thinking, because people interpret not only data, but form. The shape itself becomes argument. A ring can mean beauty. A ring can mean authority. A ring can mean covenant. But a ring can also mean confinement, closure, encirclement, no escape. Now add another layer. Saturn's movement through time gave it a reputation for seriousness that reached far beyond religion. In astrology, it came to represent discipline, limits, consequence, maturity, sorrow, pressure, duty, and karmic weight. You do not have to believe astrology to notice the pattern. Culture kept returning to the same emotional field. Saturn was not the fun planet. It was the hard teacher, the judge, the wall you hit, the bill that comes due. Why that emotional consistency? Maybe because Saturn's slowness suggested age. Maybe because distance suggested coldness. Maybe because dim light suggested melancholy. Or maybe, in the oldest layers of memory, Saturn carried an inherited sense of sealed danger, and later cultures translated that feeling into the language they had available. And then there is the modern visual shock that keeps breathing life into these theories, Saturn's north polar hexagon. A gigantic six-sided storm shape observed for decades, sitting at the planet's pole like a mark nobody can ignore. Scientists describe it in fluid dynamics terms, and that is fair. There are models, there are atmospheric explanations, but emotionally, visually, symbolically, the hexagon does not feel ordinary. It feels intentional even if nature produced it. That is exactly why people attach meaning to it. Because the human mind does not separate geometry from significance very easily. When we see order, especially strange order, we ask what it means. A swirling planet with a stable geometric feature at its crown sounds like something ancient visionary literature would absolutely seize upon. Not because ancient writers knew meteorology, but because geometry has always felt like the language of structure. In a symbolic reading, a marked crown on Saturn would fit the idea of designation, a sign, a boundary marker, a visible reminder that this object is not merely passing through the heavens, but serving a role in the order of things. Again, that does not prove the prison theory, but it makes the theory powerful, memorable, and sticky. It gives it images strong enough to survive in the imagination of anyone who encounters it. A pale, ringed world, a dark old text, a cosmic rebellion, a prison nobody can reach. A mark at the top, a thing still turning in the night. This is why the idea spreads, not because every claim is equally strong, but because the story fits together with eerie emotional precision. Now, there's another point many people miss. The fear of Saturn may reveal as much about humanity as it does about the sky. We fear containers when we suspect they hold something larger than us. We fear sealed things when we think the seal exists for our protection. A locked room is not frightening because it is locked. It is frightening because someone decided it should stay closed. The prison interpretation of Saturn works on exactly that instinct. It takes one of the most beautiful sights in the solar system and turns it into a warning sign. It asks you to imagine that the ancient world was not simply worshipping planets or decorating myths. It asks you to imagine they were trying, in broken symbolic language, to preserve a memory about danger at the edge of the world. It is not just about whether Saturn is a planet. Of course, in modern astronomy, Saturn is a planet. The real claim is deeper and stranger, that in an older sacred worldview, planet was never enough to explain what Saturn meant. It was a category too small for the role assigned to it. Science can tell us what Saturn is made of. It can tell us its mass, its magnetic field, its winds, its storms, its moons, and its orbit. But it does not ask what Saturn meant to civilizations that saw in it a recurring image of law, endings, inversion, and dread. Religious imagination asks that question. Myth asks that question. Esoteric readings of Enoch ask it with dangerous intensity. And those readings never settle for harmless answers. They say Saturn is not merely an object to observe. It is a witness, a boundary, a monument to judgment. Perhaps even a reminder that rebellion did not begin with humans and will not end with humans. If this video has already changed the way you'll look at the night sky, press like, subscribe for the next deep dive, and share it with someone who says they want mystery. But only if they can handle losing sleep. Let's go even deeper. If Saturn, in the Enochic imagination, stands for containment, then the most important question is not what ancient people saw with their eyes. It is what they believed about history before recorded history. Enoch is obsessed with the idea that humanity inherited a damaged world. Knowledge was corrupted. Boundaries were crossed. Powers descended. Violence spread. The visible world became the aftermath of invisible rebellion. That worldview changes everything. In a normal history, human civilization rises, struggles, and invents stories. In Enoch's history, human civilization is born into the shadow of prior catastrophe. Humans are not first on the stage. We arrive after breach, after contamination, after transgression. The world is already carrying a wound, and wounded worlds need safeguards. This is where Saturn becomes more than a symbol of punishment. It becomes a symbol of unfinished danger. A prison is only necessary if the threat remains real. You do not keep eternal chains around something harmless. You build them because release is unthinkable. That is why the prison interpretation feels so heavy. It implies that the oldest rebellion was not erased. It was managed, contained, not eliminated, bound, not gone. And the difference between those ideas is enormous. Many religious stories comfort people by assuring them that evil will eventually vanish without residue. But Enoch often feels less comforting than that. It presents divine judgment as real, yes, but also as procedural. It suggests systems, places, waiting periods, reserved punishments, restrained powers, and future releases. Evil is not magic smoke that disappears because heaven says so. It is an active force that may have to be quarantined. If you bring that logic to Saturn, the emotional result is explosive. Now, Saturn is not simply the cold judge in symbolic astrology. It is the outer quarantine marker of creation itself, a celestial warning label, a silent announcement that the universe contains locked things older than empires, older than scripture as most people know it, maybe even older than humanity. Imagine standing under a clear night sky before electricity, before city glare, before modern science gave every object a neat category. Imagine elders telling you that the cosmos is alive with order, danger, and memory. Imagine hearing that some powers were buried below, others cast down, and others sealed far away, where they could be seen but never reached. Then imagine someone pointing toward Saturn. You would never look at it the same way again. That may be why the most effective stories about Saturn do not rely on complexity. They rely on one simple emotional move. They take something above us and turn it into evidence that history is bigger, darker, and less complete than we thought. Suddenly, the sky is not empty. It is aftermath. There is also a deeper psychological reason the Saturn prison theory survives. It gives form to a problem humans always wrestle with. Where does evil go when it is defeated? We are used to stories where monsters die, tyrants fall, demons are cast out, and chaos is overcome. But what if some forms of corruption cannot simply be destroyed? What if they must be isolated? What if the architecture of the cosmos includes places designed for what should never again touch ordinary life? That thought is both terrifying and strangely satisfying. Terrifying because it means the threat was once immense. Satisfying because it means the universe is not careless. It means there are locks, there are walls, there are boundaries that still hold. And Saturn, in this theory, becomes the most visible lock in existence. Even people who reject the literal claim still feel its poetic power. Because, poetry aside, the image works. A ringed world at the edge of naked eye visibility, a planet associated with time, judgment, burden, and fear. An ancient text obsessed with divine prisons and celestial boundaries, a modern geometric anomaly near its pole. You do not need all of that to prove the case. You only need it to keep the case alive in the imagination. But let's be careful not to flatten Enoch into modern conspiracy language. That would be too easy and too cheap. Enoch is not powerful because it can be forced to support any bizarre idea. It is powerful because it reveals how ancient people could think cosmically without separating the moral world from the physical one. For them, heaven was not a metaphor warehouse. It was administration, governance, record, process, response. Within that world, a prison in the heavens is not absurd. It is coherent. That coherence is the real reason the Saturn theory does not die. More than that, it exposes how small modern categories can feel when dealing with ancient visionary texts. Today we ask, is Saturn a planet or not? Ancient religious imagination might answer, yes, but that is not the whole question. In other words, physical identity and sacred function do not cancel each other. A thing can be materially one thing and spiritually another. A mountain can be rock and holy ground. Water can be liquid and judgment. A city can be stone and symbol. So Saturn can be a planet in astronomy and still be, in sacred memory, something far more charged. That layered way of thinking is hard for modern minds, but it may be exactly what gives the theory its strength. It refuses either-or thinking. It says the heavens can be read at more than one level. And if that is true, then Saturn becomes one of the most haunting objects in the sky. Not because everyone agrees on what it is, but because nobody can strip it of meaning for very long. Science describes it, myth dramatizes it, religion moralizes it, esoteric readings weaponize it. Saturn keeps escaping simple language. The final twist is this: whether the prison theory is literally true is in one sense almost beside the point. Its deeper power lies in what it reveals about the human need to believe that chaos can be contained, that rebellion has boundaries, and that the visible universe still bears the marks of ancient judgment. Saturn becomes the symbol of that hope and that fear at the same time. Hope, because the prison still holds. Fear, because prisons can imply prisoners. And prisoners imply history is not over, so when someone says, the Book of Enoch says Saturn is not a planet, what they usually mean is not that astronomy is fake. What they mean is far more unsettling. They mean Saturn was understood as a role before it was understood as a category, a boundary before a body, a warning before a world, a visible structure in the heavens that told ancient humanity one thing in the clearest language possible. Some things had to be locked away, and the lock was never hidden. If you made it this far, share this video with the person who loves ancient mysteries, subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and leave a like if you want more scripts that make old texts feel dangerously alive. Now think about what that means the next time Saturn rises. A small pale light in the dark, beautiful, silent, remote. Easy to admire, easy to photograph, easy to explain with modern terms, but beneath all of that, still carrying the weight of ancient fear, still surrounded by the stories of limits, reversal, law, and judgment, still sitting at the edge of ordinary sight like a signpost from a forgotten map. Maybe the ancients were wrong about the details. Maybe later interpreters stretched the text too far. Maybe the prison language is symbolic, not literal. Those are fair possibilities, serious possibilities. But even then, the survival of this idea tells us something important. Human beings kept looking at Saturn and feeling that it meant more than it showed. Because symbols do not survive for thousands of years unless they touch something deep. Saturn touched fear. It touched order. It touched the imagination of boundaries. It touched the terrifying possibility that the universe is not merely vast, but morally structured. That there are places for blessing, places for rebellion, places for judgment, and places where dangerous things are held far from us. And maybe that is why Enoch still disturbs people. Not because it is old, not because it is controversial in some circles, not because it mentions strange beings and hidden knowledge, but because it dares to picture a universe where nothing is random, where evil leaves architecture behind, and where the night sky itself may still carry the evidence. If Saturn was seen that way, then every glance upward becomes more than observation. It becomes confrontation, a reminder that beauty can conceal restraint, that silence can conceal warning, that distance can conceal memory, and that the most unsettling truths are often the ones hanging in plain sight, visible to everyone, understood by almost no one, turning slowly above us, while the world below forgets why it was ever afraid at all.